So now about the concepts. In concepts, the glossary and terminology of a system are very important. Oftentimes we do not describe problems or enhancements or solutions with the correct terminology, and then that leads to confusion, and we don't understand the context of a specific issue and philosophy. So in that space, a system, what Integrator calls system, is a very critical concept. If you consider integration as a play, then systems would be the actors in that play. So you would have a typical system like host, which is a generic name for any host system that might be talking to Blue Yonder WMS. DCS is a reserved name for Rectory's own one of its WMSs. So that is what you would have. If you have automation systems, you would see some of those names there. If you have a parcel system, you may see those names there. If you have SAP, you would see that here. So that is what a system is. So then most of the time when systems are communicating with Blue Yonder, they send data to Blue Yonder. So that is called inbound IFD. So IFD here stands for interface document. That's what IFD stands for. So inbound IFD is when data is sent to us. So a good way to, a good analogy for inbound IFD is that it has segments and fields. So, that is also the philosophy of Integrator as well, that it views them as tables. So that's a good way to imagine what this is. This is so you can say that there's a ship order segment is a table and it has certain fields in it. So if you think of it that way, then some of the concepts underneath it would make sense. Then we have a concept of event. So that is something which is often misunderstood, and we sometimes think of events as inbound events, outbound events. That is not what Integrator's philosophy and concepts are. Integrator thinks it is an event is an event. There is no such thing as inbound or outbound. So the right side, what you see right now, is something I would say is very elegant in that it is talking about item lot change event. And then as you can see, that event's output is going to an external system like Hub and also Rectory. So which is basically describing a situation which is not atypical. This is a real world situation that WMS itself can change lot and also somebody else can change lot. So that is now how Integrator wants to be used, that you should be sharing the event in those cases. So again, very important insight that if we think of about events as events and not as inbound and outbound, certain new concepts are cleared up. So then there is a concept of algorithm. So algorithm you would see all over the place, field level algorithms, blocking algorithms, etc. So these are basically places where you can write a piece of software to create a small enhancement in a different behavior. Very important insight here is that every algorithm is in a group, and those groups are prefixed with SL underscore, but there are unfortunately groups which are not with SL prefix as well. And some of them are unfortunately standard as well. But very important insight is that try to create algorithms and put them in the groups which are for them in SL underscore technical groups, because some of the screens show the algorithms which are in a specific group based on that division. Otherwise, it doesn't make any difference other than the fact that certain screens will not show your algorithms in those places. Then, as we described event, so event is something occurring in that integration play. And then when an event occurs, it passes in scalar input. Like if your trailer got dispatched, it would say this is the trailer ID. If inventory got moved, it would say this is the pallet ID. So but we really, for example, if a trailer is leaving the facility, we are interested in its shipments on it, stops on it, inventory ID on it. So those are the information which is extracted in the form of event output. So that is something where we start with the scalar input of the event, and we then keep expanding and expanding and create a large data set, which is the event output. So that's what, so event outputs are created. You can create them using SQL, or you can create them using Mocha commands as well. General, like a small tip here would be that always default to Mocha commands. They give you a lot of flexibility, but that is a little bit up to the specific context as well. Then we have result IFD. So event output, the event occurred like shipment dispatch, its output is captured, but you probably need to send it to a specific system in a specific layout. So those are result IFDs. That is where your format is biased by how the other system wants it. So they have two types, generally, broadly speaking. Either you are interested in structure of the data, which is typical when we are talking to another system, or integrator also considers when you want to execute something directly, that is also a result IFD. What do we mean by executing directly? Like many times when you are getting data into WMS, Blue Yonder WMS itself, you are not creating another file for Blue Yonder WMS. You are actually trying to create the item. You're actually trying to create the receipt. You're actually trying to create the order. So integrator considers that as a result IFD as well. So these are just broadly speaking two different types of result IFDs. Then we have communication mode. So that is where we would have asynchronous communication, synchronous communication, or synchronous accept send. So synchronous accept send is, I would cover more of it later, but that is something which is unfortunately not used more often. That is many times a silver bullet for some of the performance issues. So, but imagine that asynchronous is something where the data is sent to the other system later on. Synchronous synchronous is something where it is sent in the same transaction right away, and synchronous accept send is something in the middle. So that I would cover a little bit later on as well. Communication methods. This is another very important concept. Very important insight here is that there is not much code within core integrator about communicating to specific systems themselves. So that also speaks to a little bit of the elegance of integrator, but also that you can create custom communication methods, and that should not be something which you should be too scared about. So communication methods are basically algorithms, and algorithms are Mocha commands. So oftentimes I've seen that sometimes requirements get overly complicated because we sometimes think that communication methods are too sacred to touch. They're not. They are just fine. We just need to know how to make the changes, but they are sometimes making changes at that level often provides us flexibility to make very small amount of change to solve the real problem, whereas otherwise it would have been a very convoluted change. So communication method are just Mocha commands. We have to understand the philosophy behind it, and changing them is not such a big deal. And then system communication is where you actually try to use that communication method for a specific system. That is where you would give the folders, system IDs, queue names, that is all at the system communication method. So there, another very important thing that when we are doing projects, we never ever put literal hard-coded values as system communication arguments. So we would never put like a f:/file path here, never. Because we always use environment variables. The reason being that all organizations would sometimes copy production down to QA. So I never want to get that call at night that, hey, QA has started to consume the orders from production or vice versa. So that is why we would always put environment variable reference when we are referring to communication method attributes. So that's a little bit about terminology. So we should know when we are describing a problem enhancement that this is the terminology according to which integrator. Then this terminology is also very important to when we are looking at screens in integrator. They would also be talking in the same language. So now there are two ways that we can invoke integrator. Method one, this is just our own terminology. This is not something which Blue Yonder calls it. But method one is basically where integrator is invoked by calling the Mocha command SL log event. Right? That is how Blue Yonder's own native systems would invoke integrator. So that means that there is a piece of code, trigger, or something like that, where it calls SL log event, passes in the scalar input and the event ID, and that is how integrator is called. So that is the system here is the DCS system. Event is what the SLog event called. So at that time, as soon as the event is called, it would create the event outputs that are needed. As we described, event output is basically if you have, for example, trailer dispatching, it is all the information about trailer, like what stops, shipments, inventory, and etc. Then the next step is result IFD. So after your event has been created, event output has been created, then result IFDs are created. And then result IFDs are sent to multiple systems. So one event output can create multiple result IFDs. That is a very important insight, that we should try to share the event outputs when we have new messages that we have to send to somebody. And one result IFD can be sent to several systems. And the question mark here means that we can define when to send a specific result IFD to a specific system. And integrator is intelligent enough that if it determines that all result IFDs are blocked, then it would not even create the event output. So it would not waste time in that effort. So basically, this is if it is a synchronous transaction, then as soon as SLog event happens, data goes to the other system. That's a synchronous. Asynchronous means that it only goes up till event output. And synchronous except send is where it would go until result IFD. It would still not send to the other system, but it would go up till the result IFD. Again, I would cover more of it later, but that is what we call method one, how native BlueYonder systems call integrator. So method two is typically how external systems like SAPs of the world, host systems would talk to integrator. In that case, what happens is that those systems, like system here, there would be like SAP or host, something. They create downloads. Now, what is a download? It could be a file, it could be a queue message, any of those approaches. It would create a download, and integrator would figure out what inbound IFDs are in it. So as I said earlier, inbound IFDs should just be imagined as tables, and that is what integrators' own philosophy is as well. They don't never become physical tables, but that is a good analogy. So all you should imagine is that as soon as these transactions were sent to integrator, just magically integrator got these tables in the form, the segments in the inbound IFD are tables, and they are available when the event gets logged. So see the event output result IFD system, that is exactly the same as method one. And that is why it is very important to not consider events as output or input events. Events are events. Either they are getting data from inbound IFD or they are getting data from the native WMS systems. So that is a very important consideration, that we should always consider an event as an event, and then that is once you're clear on it, that's when you would then see that there's a lot of opportunity to share the same events. So now, just to summarize some of the important concepts that we have discussed, that whenever we are talking about events, always consider event as an event and not as an inbound or outbound. And when we are retrieving data for it, do prefer Mocha to retrieve data. That allows a lot of flexibility down the line. Because Mocha algorithms can use pipes, they can call other Mocha commands, there's a good reuse of code. So generally speaking, our rule of thumb is that we always prefer Mocha commands when we are retrieving data. Event arguments are available for events like ship ID, but a very important insight there is that event arguments, you can add custom event arguments to standard events as well. And Mocha has a very nice feature of Mocha functions, and those can be called as event arguments. So oftentimes that alone saves a lot of time and effort, that there was some piece of data that was needed, and we can just easily add that as an event argument, and it then opens up a lot of possibilities to make simpler solutions. Another very important consideration is that just consider inbound IFD segments as tables. If we consider them like that, then a lot of concepts would open up. Use sync except send when we are defining transactions to the other systems. Always use sync except send. Don't use asynchronous. And never get intimidated by communication method. Try to figure out what the problem is. If communication method is what needs to be changed, then just understand that those are just Mocha commands as well. And never hard code communication method attributes. Environment variables can easily be referenced, and they basically make the overall experience of supporting much easier, because you can sleep better that under no situation would QA start consuming data from production.